And welcome to today's roundtable session. Today, we are going to be talking about accessibility in the research process. And although it's April 1st, this is not April Fool's Day. We are really talking about accessibility in the research process. And we have a fantastic panel today. We have four panelists. We have Welter Wu, a doctoral student from the Department of Psychology, Erin Durbin, assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology, Nathan Stenberg, doctoral candidate in the Department of Theater, Arts, and Dance, and Angela Carter from Minnesota Transform. So I think rather than introducing everybody. And I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Thomas Lindsay. I'm the Director of Research for the College of Liberal Arts, Research Support, for the College of Liberal Arts. And today's roundtable discussion is jointly presented by Minnesota Transform and the College of Liberal Arts' Office of Research and Graduate Programs. So with that said, I think I'd like to have the panelists go ahead and introduce yourselves. And I'd like to start with Angela, if that's okay.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone. My name is Angela Carter. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white woman with red hair piled up on the top of my head. I'm wearing my red glasses today. I'm excited to be here with you all. I am currently the Minnesota Transform pedagogy specialist working specifically on thinking about teaching and learning around social justice. And I'm excited and honored to have that position. Prior to my work with Minnesota Transform, I was an access consultant at the Disability Resource Center. And before that, I completed my PhD here at the U, where I was a disabled student and instructor. And I am excited to have this conversation with so many amazing folks. So thanks for having me.
And Welter?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Welter, and I am currently a 6-year grad student working at a psychology department with Professor Gordon Lake on the research related to low vision. Most of my research focus on how impaired vision affect people's daily lives, with a special focus on reading and assist technologies. And beside my own personal interests, I am very interested in accessibility because I am also someone who has impaired vision. I was born with one type of inherited retinal disease, and I think I have a very deep interest in this topic. And another thing I'm working on is my advisor and I are trying to found or working on the organization called International Network of Researchers with Visual Impairment and Their Allies. We call INOVA. And one of our very first projects in that organization is to work on improving accessibility in scientific conferences, which can be broadly included in this research process topic. So just this is my own personal interest and I'll advocate for it. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Welter. Erin, could you go next?
Hi, my name is Erin Durbin. I am a faculty member in the Department of Anthropology. I am a white queer person with short brownish hair, blue rim glasses, and a blue collared shirt and a polka dot blue bow tie. I was happy to pull that out today. And I am also, I should say, with Angela Carter, co-chair of the Critical Disability Studies Collective at the University of Minnesota. And this question about what is our interest and investment, I would say I'm in the Department of Anthropology now, but my degrees have all been in interdisciplinary areas. And I would say ones that had a real commitment to accessibility in the university in general, for first generation students, for queer and trans students, for students of color. And so I came to anthropology really with those commitments and thinking about that in terms of pedagogy and research. And I found in anthropology that there was more rigidity in terms of how people thought research should be done. And so that really opened up questions for me as a disabled, chronically ill person in anthropology, but also with those commitments, thinking about how to create accessibility in research. And so I have been experimenting with methods that are more accessible in terms of ethnographic research and archival research. And so that's what I'll share with you today.
Fantastic, thank you. And Nathan?
Hi, everyone. My name is Nathan Stenberg. I am a white male with brown hair. I am wearing my mother's Air Force Vietnam era jacket and a denim button-down shirt. There is a white wall behind me, and I am living in Washington, D.C. So the joys of remote events. I am a first-generation disabled college student from rural Minnesota. So research barriers were always kind of a thing because I was told I was never going to go to school. So this is something that just from the day I was born has been kind of a barrier. More on that later. But in terms of degree and subject matter, I am a fifth-year PhD candidate in the Department of Theater Arts and Dance. And I research a former state institution for disabled people closed by the Supreme Court of the United States back in the 1980s and later turned into a haunted house. And I'm really interested in where the line between what is perceived as care and what is received as violence blurs. And from that research, surprise, surprise, the people that work at the haunted house are disabled themselves. And they're largely ostracized by the kind of mainline disability advocacy community and the academic disability studies community by and large. And so I'm really interested in how that community as a group of disabled folks in a place that was originally designed for their segregation and slow death, how they come to understand accessibility, particularly as folks who are very much vested in this history since they continue to preserve the location and do their best to reclaim this narrative, but in ways that are not necessarily recognizable or accepted by kind of, mainstream disability studies and mainstream disability advocacy.
Thank you so much. I definitely look forward to hearing more about that. Okay, so I think to start out, actually, I'd like Nathan to go first, but for the panel, what common barriers have you witnessed or experienced in your research and creative work, and what have been the solutions you've seen that help to minimize or eliminate these barriers?
Well, my first response kind of is going to blur into my response to the second question. But I mean, honestly, the most common barrier I've seen is just folks telling me I can't do something or I shouldn't be doing something as a disabled person. As my introductory comment, went along, I was never supposed to go to school. I was never supposed to go to college, right? So the fact that I'm getting a research PhD right now is kind of the complete antithesis to 90% of what folks in power, folks with academic and specifically medical credentials have told me. So that's the first barrier, is just how are we engaging with people with disabilities, and what assumptions do we bring to the table for folks both with apparent disabilities and with non-apparent disabilities? Because as someone who has a disability that was far more apparent when I was younger and is now far less apparent now that I'm older, those assumptions have changed a whole heck of a lot and how I've had to kind of advocate for myself in these spaces, and the accommodations or accessibility measures I've needed have frankly changed over the years. Because when I was younger in a wheelchair, it was, can I get in the door? And now it's, okay, you know, the research that I'm working on is as a disabled person with PTSD around medical experiences, when I'm looking at patient files, how am I going to be able to do my research in this, you know, like summer's coming up, right? So we have like 3 months to do this. How am I going to find space to be able to, you know, care for myself, do what I need to do, and cover this material that I need to cover in this time, right? So it boils down to just communication. And it's amazing how little professors particularly want to communicate, whether that's in classwork and syllabus, or, you know, even working one-on-one in research project related issues. And finally, I'll just say the other big common issue is just common sense and being able to talk to people, right? In saying that, well, I don't want to make my, you know, my materials screen reader accessible, right? Or get my lectures out to people early, or have, you know, set up agendas for meetings with advisors, right? Because I'm too busy, or I've got too many things to do. And those simple tasks can really lower the entry point for a lot of folks. And I think it's at times just strictly negligence, but we allow ourselves to just kind of be okay with, you know, well, I'm too busy, or I've got too much to do. And yeah, just very simple things. And lastly, like I think of like in my building, one of the biggest barriers to research in my department is the elevator, right? Because we live in the bunker, which for those of you who don't know, it's Rarig. It's the big bunkerish looking building on the West Bank. If there's ever a zombie apocalypse, you know where to go. But it's 6 floors, and all the non-disabled students use the elevators. And I remember one time I was late for one of my first classes because I couldn't get on the elevator. Right. And so it's just something as simple as that, of just being like, do I really need to do this? Is there someone else here that possibly might need this more than I do? Those kinds of things. I mean, I can go into far more technical issues around, you know, methodologies, primary archives, et cetera. But just those bare bone basic ideas of being a decent human and looking around to see who is or is not in the room and why goes a heck of a long way in terms of reducing accessibility barriers.
I'm happy to jump in after Nathan. I want to follow up on, or I really, I guess, resonated with one of the things that you said around folks telling you that you can't do it. We shared that experience. I had folks, you know, medical doctors, all kinds of professionals, voc rehab people tell me that people with my disability don't finish college, let alone go to graduate school, and I needed to find a more realistic career path. And so I think that's a huge one, a huge barrier. I just wanted to affirm and say that happens to so many of us. I think that, like Nathan, I also come from a rural working class background and was the first person in my family to go to college. So when I became disabled in college, no one in my family knew how to help me navigate higher education as a person with a disability. So even something as much as getting in contact with the Disability Resource Center as an office that might be able to support my research agendas was something that I didn't know how to do. I didn't know the questions to ask. So I didn't come to find out until I was in my 5th year of graduate school here that I could get support from the DRC around some of my research barriers. I didn't know that. I didn't understand that. So that was really helpful. And I think that, you know, the first thing that, the kind of 3 things that I wrote down that I guess maybe are more technical around research are the material or the format of the material. So I work with the DRC now to be able to convert my material to something that is screen reader accessible, but that is a process that can be very time consuming and complicated, and not, and especially when you're thinking about archival material or books that might be out of print and things of of that nature. So, again, to echo what Nathan said, as much as anyone can do to make their material accessible, the better for everyone. And then I think that the other big two for me were time constraints and the restraints of travel. It took me 10 years to finish my PhD. My members of my cohort finished in 5, and I think 4, maybe 6. Anyway, much shorter years than I. They were able to get through the program quicker than I was because of my what's often called crip time in community, how I move through time and space in slower ways than able-bodied folk. And so, things that we can do to think about how disabled folks might need more time to do their research to the standards that we need, that the university requires, and how we can support that. So I have ideas around supporting the time constraints as well. And then the travel impacts. It's very difficult for me and takes a lot out of me to travel, as it does for a lot of disabled folks, both with apparent and non-apparent disabilities. So when I would think about research that might take me places, or being in conversation with other researchers, doing work like mine, that means I need to go places. It's very difficult. Ways that we can continue, or we can lower that barrier, is to continue hybrid and virtual events for disabled folks and for the access of lots of folks who may or may not identify as disabled. I love in-person things. I hope to see folks in person someday again. And also, disabled communities were doing this Zoom thing way before it was cool, and I hope we can continue to do it because it makes so much more accessible for so many of us. I'll pause there so other folks have time to jump in.
I think you're next, Welter.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So I agree with 2 previous panelists talking about what is the general idea of being excluded in academia as a person with disability. I may want to talk about this question about research accessibility, or accessibility in research, in 2 ways with my own perspective as a person with visual impairments. So one is a more micro way, one is more macro way. So the micro way is like the daily accessibility barriers you encounter especially in a research context. As a person who is trained in psychology, neuroscience area, I would say most of the research tool, they are not accessible to people or researchers with visual impairments. For example, if you are doing brain image studies, most of the brain image analysis tool, like XP and AFNI, I don't even not be able to change the font size of it, not even mention how am I going to use screen reader to navigate those tools. And for most of the time, I have to rely on my colleagues for them to describe things to me. And even I apply for an assistant, for an undergrad assistant, to help me to do this. They don't have the background knowledge for them to understand what those means. And usually that hinder the conversation between me and my assistant. We have to spend a lot of time figuring out, okay, what I mean by this, what I mean by that. And then, like, even for some not software thing, hardware thing is not accessible to researcher with visual impairment as well. I'm doing most of my research in vision science. I have a lot of chance I have to use a photometer to measure the brightness on the monitor for me to calibrate my experiment. But for those photometer, they are designed for people who are visually they are normally sighted. They can see the numbers, but the numbers disappear right away before I can use my magnifier. So that is very frustrating. For everything you try, the equipment you can have in the research area, they are not accessible to you. And if we think about this question in a more macro way, that somewhat echo with what 2 previous panelists talk about, the whole society or the whole academia, how they think about people with disability in research context. We have one colleague in the organization I just talked about at Johns Hopkins University. She conducted a study recently trying to look at NIH data and see how many PIs with disability are funded by NIH. And the result is less than 2%. And if you think about it, as a researchers, the basic question for a future student with disability, if they want to consider being a researcher in the field, do they see the future? That's a question I ask myself before I enter my doctoral studies. I am very fortunate to have my advisor who is also visually impaired as well, and he's very successful. So I am able to see how he navigate his path through this research world. But if you're seeing someone, like you're someone with disability and you're not seeing anyone succeed in the field, what I have seen in the past is my students are talking to me like, why I have to waste my time doing research? It doesn't worth it, and I'm not going to succeed anyways. And that became a vicious cycle in the research or academia because you have less and less people thinking they are going to succeed or in academia, they're not going to join academia. And then we have less member with disability, and then suddenly everyone in the research in academia thinking about, okay, we don't have to make things accessible to our members because I don't see anyone with disability there. And that vicious cycle is, I think, what we're seeing now. I have a few experiences. This is my last example. I have a few experiences trying to get in touch with some very large conference organizer associations talking about accessibility in their conference. They all came back to me say, we don't have that many people with disability attending our conference, and why I have to make this conference accessible to you, maybe less than 10 people, and adjust whole context for another 20,000, 30,000 researchers attending the conference. And I think they basically have the wrong answer to it. If you don't make things accessible, how are you going to expect people with disability join the academia? So that's something I want to say about this question.
And well, I guess I'll echo a little bit what everybody has said, but I didn't identify as disabled until I was an assistant faculty member. And that really had to do with the worsening of my chronic health conditions. And it really made me wonder. I got a job in anthropology, and most of my research had been field research in Haiti and its diaspora. And I really relied on having that kind of mobility to get the job that I had. And so then once I was in anthropology, I had a crisis, both about whether I could be an anthropologist, and because the whole model of anthropology, even if it's in the United States, a lot of people still go abroad for their field work, but even if it's in the United States, the whole model is that one researcher is really hypermobile and works around other people's immobilities. And I was like, whoa, what happens when that's not the case anymore? And I actually wrote a piece about that as like part of my processing I was going to share with you in the chat about ableism and anthropology. But I would say, right, nobody told me I couldn't do it, but I really had a crisis about like, could I do it? And could I even be a professor? Because the demands are so intense. And so what I wrote this piece about some of the barriers in anthropological research. I started thinking like, how might this look different, right? People have been really discouraged from staying in place, like doing research where they live, which is so important, especially for people who have like medical care set up where they are, and also about studying one's own community or doing autoethnography. It's really valued mostly that people do this sort of old model. And I was thinking like, how can we do this differently? So the pandemic actually provided an opportunity to experiment with that a little bit. I teach ethnographic research methods, and as all of my students couldn't go into the field, which would be someplace in town usually or at the university, I was like, okay, I'm gonna take all these things I've learned and we're going to create remote field work. It's gonna be totally remote except for me. We did it in my neighborhood, this project about my neighborhood. I live on a university campus, so it's a bit about how this faculty neighborhood where I live was created. It was created at a time when there was a lot of racial covenants in the Twin Cities, and Middlebrook, the administrator, created this campus faculty neighborhood through the category of faculty, but that meant it was all white men. So he created an all white neighborhood. And so I thought, right, here's this project. It's not explicitly about disability, but it's accessible to me in the pandemic because I can walk out my door and we can work on figuring out how to do field work together. And it was accessible to my students. And the way we managed this was through technology. So I'll talk about that a little bit more. But like I essentially put on an action camera when I would go out with my partner, Miranda Joseph, who's on here. She also is like collaborating on this research project. And we created field work of us sort of traveling through the neighborhood for people to observe what the neighborhood was like and practice basic fieldwork skills through that technology. And then we also figured out some of the barriers people have to access could be managed if people shared their field notes. So one of the ways people sort of create data ethnographically as they go into the field, and then they take a bunch of field notes and they start to like see patterns emerge from their observations. And students are used to doing this by themselves. Researchers do this by themselves. And instead, students, so there'd be, 15 students looking at the same video of us going around the neighborhood and creating notes together, and they started to notice like, oh, I didn't notice that this was that, or I hadn't tuned into that these were all single family houses or stuff, depending on where they lived, what their backgrounds were. It like provided a lot of opportunities to be self-reflexive about their observations, where usually they all go and field work in different places and they can't provide that kind of feedback for each other. But also it created the opportunity to do a workaround for something that Welter mentioned, which is that when you collaborate, there can be people who have different capacities who support each other. So for instance, for students or faculty collaborators who are deaf or hard of hearing, there could be like transcripts provided, both visual transcripts, and we also did auditory transcripts that are available through people's accessible technology. So we could sort of complement each other, and so that not one person was responsible for every part of the research process. And that meant more people could be there. And so the first time I did this, to the second time, it totally shifted who was in my class, who was coming, and it created a broad kind of accessibility because we were doing this in an asynchronous, remote way. So it meant that most of my students went from being white, able-bodied, middle-class anthropologist students to like anthropology students to queer and trans and chronically ill immigrants, first generation people who live sort of outside the Twin Cities, who have other sorts of mobility things. And I was like, oh, and people from outside of the country, which was great. Like we were all working on a project together from different places. And so it made me think, like, how could we do this more, right? Like to just break down some of those little barriers. And the way that I had thought about that was really based on my work with like the Critical Disability Studies Collective and being in other sort of cross-disability spaces where people are always collaborating and working with each other and sharing sharing documents and trying to open up conversations about accessibility. And so that, if one person's not available, then there are 3 other people who are picking up the work and like making sure everybody's there together and nobody gets excluded because, they're sick for a day or something. And that really helped me think about the research design for this and like working around some of those barriers that are part of ethnographic research models.
Well, I think, as you're talking about that, I think you're sort of already jumping into what I was thinking about as my next question here, which is from your experience, what guidance would you give a mentor who's interested in learning how to provide better mentorship for their students or mentees who have access needs or have experienced access barriers? Sounds like you're already part of the way towards answering that. So Erin, do you want to start?
Yeah, this is the hardest question that you sent us for me to answer in a sense, because one of the things I just want to reiterate again and again to my colleagues is that there are disabled students that they're working with. And they may not know that because I hear a lot that people are like, oh, this one student with these access needs they have to think about. But I was like, oh, if you just start to think like disabled students are who you're working with, then that might shift your perception. And I do think it relies on becoming comfortable with talking about disability, like growing your capacity to do that, and also like being open to learning about what that means for different people in terms of what they need. Because especially when I was thinking about that research model, I can't anticipate everything in advance. That's kind of the whole point. Like people will come with their different body minds and their different personalities, and really figuring out like what works takes a lot of openness and communication, specifically about both the disabilities related things, but also about how things are done normally in general, and like having more reflexivity about that. And so I want to actually advocate that it's less about like one-on-one interactions and like trying to like open up open up people's minds to having disabled students and colleagues in a bigger kind of way.
I can go ahead and jump in again because I'm nodding so much. I'm making myself dizzy. Y'all are saying such wonderful things. I think that, like, to kind of build on what Erin is saying, we all know, or many of us may know the statistic, 1 in 4 folks in the US are disabled or have a disability experience. And guess what? The pandemic is only increasing our numbers. The joke in disability community is that you're either disabled or you're a TAB, a temporarily able-bodied person. And I think it's really important that we think about that and also realize that disability experiences do not impact us all equally. Different populations are disproportionately impacted by disability and by structures of inequity that lead and can lead to either disability itself or to worsening disabling conditions. So there are bigger pictures here, which is what Erin is speaking of and what we have to get into in higher education. And so for me, that's understanding that we all have access needs. Even if you do not identify as disabled or you do not currently have a disabling condition, you have an access need. Technology, caring for family members, cultural differences, language differences. There's all kinds of ways that we have to expand how we think about access. And when I talk with instructors and when I think about this in my own classroom or with people I'm working with, collaborators, students that I'm working with, it's very important to think about the access barrier and the access need, which you'll notice is the language that we've been using, not the disability identity or diagnosis. It took me 6 years to get my most recent disability diagnosis, and I was impacted by that disability for at least 8, if not more than 10 years. So if we rely only on someone having a diagnosis or working with the DRC in a formal process, we are going to continue to keep our research and our work inaccessible. So we have to think about the access need. And I think, along with Erin's piece, there's so much out there in disability studies and by disabled researchers about thinking about ableism in higher education. I'm going to go ahead and plug myself too, and in a collaborative piece that I did when I was a graduate student with 3 other disabled graduate students about our experience with ableism in graduate school. And this was one of the first collaborative pieces that I did. We never met each other in person. We worked, again, hybridly or remotely as we wrote this. And I think Erin's point and other folks that have talked about collaboration is such a big deal. Disabled folks really think a lot about what it means to work and live collaboratively and collectively, because then we can support one another. And so shifting our focus, and by our, I mean higher education's focus on the single author, primary author research kind of monograph has to change. That is an inaccessible model of thinking about research. We all do better thinking when we think together. So we have to start uplifting that as a way of knowing and producing knowledge. And lastly, I'll say that for me, the biggest piece of advice or guidance I give to mentors and educators when working with disabled students or any marginalized student is believe students. Believe them, just believe students. If a student says, this is my access need, this is what I'm struggling with, say, okay, I believe you. And if they're lying to you, they probably need to lie to you because they don't feel safe trusting you to tell you the truth. And that could have nothing to do with you and everything to do with years of ableism or racism or homophobia, transphobia they've experienced. So if the grandma died 3 times, it's because grandma has died 3 times. And that's okay. Think about what you need to support the student, right? And what we as a university and institution need to change to support the student, because it's not the one-on-one, it's the bigger social changes that can happen. And the last thing I'll say on this is I very deliberately made choices in my research thus far to be textual analysis, cultural analysis, because of how inaccessible lots of research practices are, IRB, interviews, things like that. And I didn't have mentors to help me learn how to do that work in an accessible way. That's changing. I feel grateful for all of the folks, the elders and the mentors that I've had in disability academic community that are helping me learn. And I am continuing to do more research in accessible ways. But I think that is another point, that if you don't know as a mentor how to give guidance, to a disabled graduate student or person you're working with, find someone who does, because they're out there and we need to listen to them and we need to listen to each other. Thank you for listening to me get excited.
Welter here. I just want to echo what two previous panelists have talked about. But I think one of them, the one and most important suggestion I will give to mentors who have concerns about taking a student with, especially a grad student with, I would say, visual impairment, my one and most important suggestion would be just do it. It depends on how you see supervision. I know some mentors or some advisors think about supervision as a kind of relationship that you have the employees to work for you to have your productivity of your lab to be consistent. But we all have to know that supervision is somewhat a bi-directional learning process. Your students are learning from you, but at the same time, you're also learning from your students. So you have to be open-minded, as what previous panelists talk about. You have to think about you are going to be trained by your students and you are open to it. You talk with them about their needs, what they think about, what they can do and what they cannot do. Open your discussion with them. And I just want to make two brief points here. I think they are very important. For many mentors I have encountered during my interview process applying to grad school, when I disclose I have visual impairment, I think the first reaction I got from them is they have concerns. They don't know. Even though they are all vision scientists, they know how vision is important for a person to live in the world, but they are so concerned about your capability. And I want to remind people that if you're an advisor and you're thinking about or you're concerned about taking a grad student with, I would say, visual impairment or disabilities, one important thing is you have to look beyond the surface. Your students are not just going to be defined by their disabilities. Students with disability follow the same pattern as all other normally sighted healthy students. Some disabled students or some visual impaired students are smart, some are not. Some visual impaired students are lazy, are not productive, and some are not. So we shouldn't take that, like I always have this impression from some of my professors. They are looking at me as a successful story in the media, expecting someone with disability to be diligent in their work, always very hardworking, try to overcome your barriers. But your students with disability are just like your other students without disabilities. And the second thing I want to mention is I think for mentors or advisors, you have to be the ally of your student with disabilities. And how do you do that? You I think many of us, all, like, even someone without disabilities, everyone has the experience of living on age. That you are a combination of so many different identities, and from everyone's past experience of life, you all have the time that you are somewhat excluded or being the minority in the society. And I think one important thing is the advisors should and have to draw your experiences from your past life experience of being a minority in the society and be the ally with your student with disability. That's what I want to say.
I was going to jump in real quickly and just add 3 points to summarize what I think I heard the other panelists so wonderfully and wisely saying. The first thing to do is ask, what do you need right now and how in the world can I help, right? How can I use my positionality, my power as a professor, as a mentor, as an advisor to assist you so that you're getting everything that you need in this moment, right? Have regular check-ins and be vulnerable about your own barriers, disability related or not. Frankly, as a disabled person, it's exhausting. Just in the last 3 weeks, you know how many non-disabled people I've had say to me, oh, well, you know, you're great, we'd love to have you, but like, no, thank you, right? Without actually answering any of the real questions that I pose to them. I've been fortunate enough where my mentors are willing to throw their, you know, institutional weight behind them and say, no, 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 this is not cool. We want real answers, right? That's what mentees can and should do. And in that, advocate, right? Advocate for not only your mentees and your advisees, but for the other people not there. I think about my department, you know, I've been very fortunate where my advisor has been willing to, like, I'm a leadership and equity and diversity fellow right now at the University of Minnesota, right? Like my department put me up for a Dove fellowship, which typically disability, when you look at other DEI fellowships, are not included as historically underrepresented communities in higher education, even though we are. People don't want to see us, right? So mentors can advocate for other people. And then finally, find other scholars. I mean, there's only 4% of faculty, right? So there's not a whole heck of a lot of us, but there are. And they might not necessarily be direct fits for in terms of research and other things, but just being able to have someone to turn to and be like, you know what, today sucked. I had a lot of pain and like I got a rejection on this article and this reviewer totally, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've had, just speaking from my own life, how many times I've had reviewers say to me, oh, well, you know, submitting an article being English as a second language. I'm like, I'm a native English speaker, right? It's my cerebral palsy and my grammar training that has creeping into, you know, into this, but yet the reviewer has no idea. And how am I supposed to describe that to my faculty members when I'm supposed to be utterly perfect in every way, right? As a graduate student, jumping through all these hoops and doing all these things, who can I disclose that to? Other than an accessibility access group and a, you know, Friday afternoon and a bunch of blank screens, right? So there needs to be real relationship and vulnerability involved in that, and not being able to, you know, to really, I think the biggest thing too for non-disabled people in positions of power, don't be afraid to put your weight out there, because one of the most common themes you'll see in the disability community is non-disabled people telling disabled people what we should want, how we should get it. Maybe it's more important that you step aside, use that power you've been given to let us to, first of all, create accessible mechanisms for us to share our voices if we so choose. And then second of all, using that institutional power to give us support if and when the flack comes.
Thank you. That's really good. Okay, so we do have about 10 minutes left, and I have one more prepared question. And that's what role do you see technology playing in helping to remove barriers or in creating its own barriers? Welter, if you'd like to start with that one, that would be great.
Yeah, I can talk about this briefly. So as a researchers or trainees with visual impairment, technology is always one thing that I am looking for and hoping for solutions. And fortunately, we are in this world now, have a lot of new innovative technologies. We started to have more people with disabilities, hopefully, people with visual impairment working in the research area, and we have more creative ideas of using technology to solve our problem. For example, I could be able to learn how to code my experiments, do my data analysis without relying on using, you know, the GUI interface on the Illustrator to make my figures. I have a consistent code working pipeline for me to generate consistent results from my analysis or from my experiments. And another big thing I think about how technology can help is when I think about a conference. I think panelists talk about this point in the past. We think this virtual world actually opened a new door for this long-lasting 20, 30 years of conference convention. Like everyone get used to getting join a very go to another city and have a like walk around in poster hall, finding different rooms, and they are not aware that that's actually very inaccessible to people with disabilities. And having this chance in the pandemic, virtual conference actually opened a new door. And but what I see recently is people are urging to close that door because everyone's talking about, I miss a lot about in-person experiences. I want to go back to in-person conferences. But at the same time, I want to remind people that we already have this tool and everyone knows how to use it now. What we have to do is we have to be creative to embed this new technologies we have in our hand into our own experiences. Those hybrid conferences can be done in a more creative way without creating a lot of accessible barriers, and at the same time include more and more people in your field. So those are 2 points I want to mention.
Yeah, thank you, Walter, for sharing those points. And I really appreciate your perspective on our panel because of how much technology is important for you to do your research. And I think for where I come from and my research, I often get frustrated when abled folks push technology on me as the answer to the barriers I'm experiencing. And I say that as someone who has gained so much access from technology. So it's both and I think folks don't understand that it's always both and. Technology can solve a lot of our access barriers. It can also create more access barriers and can become not worth the months of trying to figure out the access around the tech. I could just do the thing in a different way. So I think that part of what has to always come with technology when we're thinking about alleviating access barriers is what's the attitudinal barrier or what's the social or cultural barrier that is along with coming along with this, and how do we address that as well? Because it's always both and we have to think about it as both and with that, for me, it's coming to think about how we can support people doing the work differently and not support figuring out how to help disabled folks do it the way abled folks always have, because that doesn't need to be the goal. The goal is how do we do the work in a way that works for us. Sometimes tech's the answer, sometimes tech isn't the answer.
Yes. And I was trying to think about this because the accessible ethnographic research is so tech reliant. So one of the funny stories, so in the second year of working on this with students, so there's so many people involved in this project now. It's been really fun, but in the second year, there was a mismatch because I use a GoPro camera, and it was an older GoPro action camera, and I put it on my chest. And so I kind of like that students, were attached to my body and they knew about my body and could sort of see how it's read in the world and see how my gait changes because of my arthritis. And so if I'm walking and walking and walking, then I start lifting a lot. But when that happens, one of the students said, I can't watch this anymore because it's making me sick. It was a Blair Witch Project kind of effect from the camera shaking. And so it was creating inaccessibility in a different kind of way. So we tried a tech hack, which is that we upgraded the camera and they build in stability features. but it still was difficult. And so what we did with that student is what we do around, like some of the other stuff around census, is that that student relied for those times when they couldn't watch the film from the field work to on the transcript that was generated by the other students to get a sense of what was there. And so it's like an imperfect kind of hack, but we're like working on figuring out like how, you know, technology gets us so far, but also we're helping each other just by being there together. And us being there together is totally enabled by technology right now. But yeah, I don't know. So I just want to say, like, it's been, I'm grateful. I'll also say, like, all the interviews happened on Zoom. And one of the great things about Zoom for ethnographic interviews is that generally they are transcribed afterward by the person who conducted the interview or somebody else. So they'll write out everything that got said. Zoom creates an auto transcript if it's recorded and you have the captions on, and it cut the transcription time down by to a quarter of the usual time, because people are just fixing the auto-generated text from Zoom. And I was in a research meeting this morning. We're doing interviews with disabled anthropologists. We're doing like a little project or whatever. And one of the older disabled anthropologists was saying, like, writing is really hard for me. Transcribing is hard for me. I want to talk to people, but that's like one of my barriers to doing this research, is that I couldn't spend that much time transcribing. Like, it's a really physically taxing process. And so we're like, oh, we've got a tech hack for that. And also when we're collaborating, you don't have to do that if you don't want to, like the other people will do it. And so yeah, those are some of my technology things. I'm glad that it does a lot for what I'm working on. And I could talk more about archival research, but we're like out of time.
I will just briefly, in like the 30 seconds we have left, to say, all these friends speak my mind in terms of digital accessibility. And the biggest thing is, you know, for me, as someone who does a lot of public speaking, I am just blown away at how many times, you know, we don't have basic accommodations. Like right now, we don't have an ASL interpretation. We don't have card transcriptions. So it's a little pointless to be having an event about accessibility when folks aren't, when the event isn't even accessible enough for them to get in, right? And that's not to put shame on the organizers of this event, but just to say, like, that's everybody. I, you know, spoke at an event hosted by an international organization, which I will not name for this, you know, for the time being, and just say that, like, even they didn't, you know, occur to them to have like a ASL interpretation and card interpretation. And it's just like, yes, we have Zoom, but like, let's not stop there, right? And it says a lot when particularly in conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusivity, when we are having, you know, these things, these events and these conversations, but yet people can't even get in the door, right?
Yes, that's absolutely true. Right. Well, we are out of time. So I do want to thank our panelists for this really fantastic conversation, this panel today.